I'm here with EJ Wokoria, the global CEO of Wolff Olins, and we're going to talk about brand leadership in the broadest sense. But for some context, branding at Wolff Olins historically has been the heritage is around the visual identity of the brand, but you've moved along. Could you tell us a bit about the journey over the last decade or so?
Yeah, actually Wolff Olins is 50 this year, and so we're spending a lot of time talking about where we've come from. And the business actually started as an industrial design company. They took industrial design into the corporation, and the whole idea then was that the identity of a corporation exists in the way it manifests in reality. And that really got reduced because that's what companies wanted to what became known as CI, corporate identity. But even then, this company has always been on a journey that what that became and how they started defining that was the idea of brand. And so while the thing that Wolff Olins has traditionally put out into the world was a visual identity, it was really an idea based on that corporations should have a real manifestation in the world, and this is the way you did that. And as the manifestation of corporations in the world has evolved beyond just the visual, our work has evolved beyond just the visual as well.
And what would you say is a central aspect now, if you in manifestation, I guess we're talking about impact in the world. What would that mean? How would you accompany a company on that journey from a branding perspective?
Yeah, so we like to talk about the levers that leaders pull. So we describe ourselves actually as creative partners for ambitious leaders. We think about brands and great brands as an outcome of great things that organizations do. So oddly, we define the things we help them do less in branding terms, but much more in terms of things that will therefore result in a great brand. And we think about four. Great brands tend to have leaders who have a clear story of what the organization is about. So we talk about leadership story. We think great brands are constantly creating, and the people in the organization understand what they're creating. So we talk about creative cultures. We think great brands put in an amazing experience into the world, built around people, built around individuals, so that I can use that organization and use its tools. So we talk about experience design. And we think great brands tend to have a way to replicate that really well. So we talk about tools to scale impact. Branding is in all of that, and in a way, branding doesn't have to be in any of that. It's really that there are things great organizations do. If they do those things well, they'll have a great brand. If they get the story right, if they get the culture right, if they get the experience right, and if they have great tools for propagating that, the result will be a great brand.
And those terms you use are quite new in the world of branding. The stories are about leadership, the cultures around people, what they do inside the organization, and the experience is something that shifts the focus from the product to the user. To the user, yes. How do you manage brands differently in that environment? What does it mean for the marketing group or maybe other groups other than marketing? Yeah,
I think the first thing that we think is that, and by the way, this has always been true, what I'm about to say is that brands are in effect technology. Brands are things that evolve and change over time. And even when your primary experience of a brand was through a television ad or through a book, it simply was because that was the dominant technology that people used. And in a world where people are using tools and apps and products and services, then your brand has to live in those worlds. So the big difference is that a lot of our work and the way it's managed is less about abstract concepts of values and attributes, and much more about product attributes. The cultural beacons and behaviors you want in the organization. We manage those things and we make sure that they're having the right impact on that brand, as opposed to manage the brand abstractly in. We manage the things that we know create great brands. And technology, across both the culture and the experience, technology sits at the heart of every single bit of that.
What would be an example of a great lead? Yep.
Hold that question just for a second, just a tiny bit of playing.
Okay.
Just tuck your cable in just on that.
Okay.
Plane's almost gone. Yep, and.
By the way, how long have you been in the industry?
I'd say since '96, so 19 years. Yeah.
So almost 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tangentially, you know. Yeah.
EJ, over the last almost 20 years or so that you were in the industry, how have your clients evolved in the way they manage brands internally? You mentioned leadership. How has the brand leadership changed, for example, in those organizations? Which companies would you say have done that well? A journey you've been able to observe?
So the big change is that because the brand is not the reason you do things, it's the outcome of doing great things. Ownership of those concepts now spreads right across the organization. So 15 years ago, and it might have been at the stage of my career, but I think 15 years ago, the brand and people owned the brand. And frankly, the rest of the organization looked at them as those airy-fairy people in the corner who kind of did the brand and stuff, and I understand why it's useful, I think, but that's the brand and people. Today, the technologist is thinking about, the chief technology officer is thinking about the brand, the chief people officer is thinking about the brand, the chief innovation officers, the COO, the CEO, everybody's thinking about the brand in the organization. Now, it might be driven from, and this is not always the case, but sometimes it might be driven from a marketing function or from a commercial function, but there are implications for the brand right across the organization. For me, that's the biggest change. So if I think about something like Skype, when we got involved with Skype, when it was largely defined as a free phone calls on computers internationally, and we really felt there was a phenomenon there that could be monetized, but the question was, how do you monetize that phenomenon without compromising it? And how do you define Skype not as a disruptor to a dying industry, but as its own thing? And the idea we had with Skype was that Skype is actually for doing things together whenever you're apart, and every time you do it, it should be universal. Everybody should be able to use it. It should be useful, and it should be wonderful. Where that really got its arms and legs was in the product and the technology teams. Frankly, Skype didn't spend a lot of money on marketing and on the traditional things we used to build brands, and we didn't change the logo. And we later on, as time went on, we started cleaning up the marketing, but it really was work with the people who define value propositions, the people who define products. And it was the technologist above all who validated that that's a great platform for us to build a company.
And did they change the internal structures as a result? Do they now have a cross-functional brand team, for example?
They don't have a cross-functional brand team, but the notions of universal, useful, and wonderful and how we measure that work right across the customer experience. So people who think about acquisition, think about universal, useful, and wonderful. People who build product, think about universal, useful, and wonderful. People who manage service, customer services, think about universal, useful, and wonderful. So they become living attributes and living qualities and principles in the organization. But it isn't about the brand team managing that. It's about whoever is responsible for putting something in the customer's hands thinks about those principles.
And are those metrics, in some sense, which are
They're
brand-based metrics?
Yes.
They're now in different functional areas, so you can execute the same strategy, I guess.
Yeah.
Are they also present at the board level at Skype?
They are driven from the board. And so the person who stands up, and I think this is the other big thing, the person who stands up and talks about the brand, I would say in every single one of our clients, particularly if they're successful, is the chief executive officer. She or he are going to be, because they are not saying this is about how we look and how we feel, they're saying this is the business we're creating. This is the impact we want to have in the world. And only the leadership of the organization can say that, which is why I always think the first thing you've got to get right if you're going to build a great brand is that leadership story. You know? And once the leader says it, and once you're clear about the imperatives to make that real in the organization, it really begins to take off.
So the role for the marketing director in this scenario has also shifted. Historically they were facing outward in many ways, with their back to the organization.
Yes.
Gathering customer insight and then communicating the brand promise.
Yes. Yeah.
Now that it's a sort of an about turn, and they need new managerial skills.
Yes.
and new ways of working.
Yeah, they still have to do that on a beast, but that's kind of almost like bookends of the process. The greatest CMOs these days are cross-functional collaborators. They're going to go into a product meeting and they're going to be able to add value. They're going to go into the culture meeting and they're going to be able to add value. They really have to be, if you like, chief collaboration officers across different parts of the organization. And the best ones of them absolutely do that and do that very well.
So they need new skills. They need to speak different languages.
Yes, and they have to be, if not native technologists, they have to get obsessed with technology. Because even down to how you think about data and how you measure and collect that data, but how you build stuff. And even in their marketing stuff, they are increasingly thinking about marketing as product. It's something that people are going to use because we're no longer buying messages and stories. It's really, people are judging brands by not just the utility of the brand, but by the usability and the enjoyment of that. So marketing officers are also increasingly thinking like product people.
Yeah. The way I refer to it in different parts of this MOOC is, branding historically was the icing on the cake, something extra, something separable, but it's really ingrained in everything we do. It sits underneath and inside.
Yes, yeah. And for us, and this is also interesting, we've come to realize not everybody uses the word brand to describe what we've just talked about, and that's fine. That's really okay. And sometimes it's purpose, sometimes it's ambition, sometimes it's philosophy, whatever it is. And actually, we've found that the word brand can sometimes get in the way. Yes. That's why we talk about the things that don't get in the way. That we need a leadership story, that we have to have a great culture, that we have to put great experiences into the world, and that we have to give the organization tools to scale that. Nobody quibbles with those, everybody gets those. And so we're not precious about the word brand. We're very proud to be a business that is seen as thought leaders in the world of branding, but we're not precious about the term at all.
Yeah. Just waiting for that. I like that thought. I have a book that was never written, but I have the cover designed.
Okay.
And I have that Banana by Andy Warhol, and the title of the book is B is for Banana.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. Branding comes with such baggage that it can literally turn the organization. It can hurt the process.
Yeah, it can get in the way. It can get in the way.
Now, the way you've articulated some of these beliefs, you yourself, you're born in the US, you're raised in Nigeria, went back to the US and got your architecture degree at Columbia. But then you came to England for your working life has been in the UK, so your career and your life has spanned 3 continents. How is branding perceived in the different parts of the world? Is this a universal approach? Maybe that's being the first question. The second one is, how do you manage a brand across such diverse contexts if your brand indeed is global?
Yeah. Let me take the first question first, because I think that one's interesting. People's understanding and definition of branding is not just different across the world, it's different within this postcode. And so that's just really the state of the organization. I have to say, when people talk about branding in Nigeria, they are either overly intellectual about it or very superficial about it. And so again, the word tends to get in the way. What is common across every market I look at is that leaders of organizations recognize more than ever that they have to rethink the way the organization is inside and outside, and that creativity is playing a bigger role than ever in how they think about the organization. And that the skills we've built, and that things, again, that I've talked about, experience, culture, leadership, so all those things are central to the way they have to think about their businesses. And so we don't find disagreement amongst leaders of significant organizations that we need to rethink the organization and how it works inside and how it works for its customers. That's universal, and that works very well. So again, you have the conversation about brand, and it feels like there's dissonance. You have the conversation about what kind of organization are we, and you have a much more positive conversation. Yeah.
And on the second question, how do you manage a brand across the globe in some sense?
Yeah. With much difficulty is the first. And different organizations take different ways to do this. There is a concept that says if you're clear about what you're trying to achieve, you distribute responsibility right as close to the customer as possible. And everybody gets the principles, and all branding then is about is how do I interpret every single interaction with the customer, and I really deliver that. I love that notion. Operationally, it can be almost impossible, but it's a great skill to have. I think the other extreme is with rigid consistency, and so you have a really good machine, a centrally driven machine that really gives everybody at the edge the tools, not just the tools, the specification for how to do that. I think that's the other extreme I think is wrong. The truth is, this is a difficult mix of bringing things together, and because brands are changing, I think that's absolutely fine. I think so brands globally, I think as long as you are clear about what the brand is about, And then people are equipped not with rules but with tools to make that relevant for each individual customer. You'll get there. And it might mean that when you see an ad in Mumbai, it's very different from the one you just saw in Mombasa, but it's delivering value for the user. That's great.
So the latter part you mentioned is the old command and control approach to branding. But the former one is, again, it's a different skill set you would need to, as a branding expert.
Yes.
Because it's now at the coalface, the people facing the consumers and customers that have to interpret the brand and adapt it to the local environment.
Yes. And so that's where really not thinking about brands as rules, but thinking about them as tools. Not thinking about the reason you're doing it or your metric as being in order to create a brand. Your metric is in order to satisfy that customer, in order to create a great experience. Or if it's something internal, in order to help that worker be as creative as possible towards a common goal. When you think that way and you just think about, therefore, giving them the tools that do that in our way, you really can unleash organizations to do amazing things.
And it takes something very different to design tools rather than visual identity or rules.
Yes.
Could you give an example of what a tool design would be in practice?
Yeah, and maybe before that to say it's also changed the kinds of people we have in this organization. So when I arrived at Wolff Olins, we had strategists, designers, and account managers. Today we have strategists, we have designers, but actually the design profession has moved from we still have some amazing graphic designers, but we have experience designers, service designers, digital designers. We have technologists. Even that's a mixed bag of all sorts of people, from software engineers to user experience experts. We have program managers who are experts at different things. And we have educators, people whose job, and these really are people who think about tools, who think about how do you turn a principle into a curriculum that somebody can learn how to do something. Organizations that do this very well, PwC has done an amazing job. And if you know anything about PwC, it's a partnership. I think there are something like 1,200 senior partners. Everybody can decide whether they want to be on brand or not. It's that kind of I think it's a hyper democracy. And so when you give people rules, I don't want to follow that rule. When you give me a tool that helps me sell more, that helps me be clearer about how the value we deliver, people adopt it. And so things like even right down to how do I write a great presentation in 6 easy steps? How do I define a value proposition by thinking about 5 big questions? Tools like that really work very well, but it takes a different skill set to create those. Yeah.
So you're really a change agent, and I think what you've just defined is very much by understanding your internal people as customers.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
You have to understand their needs.
Yes.
And all too often our design guidelines are restrictive, whereas this is really about enabling people.
Yes. At the heart of a brand is ultimately people. And sometimes I might have been guilty of this, I'm sure I was, certainly 10 years ago, maybe even more recently, of thinking that at the heart of the brand was the brand. It's not, it's people, and it's what people are trying to achieve, what jobs they're trying to do, what need they're trying to meet, and we have to make brands and branding and anything we're creating experiences at the service of people as opposed to at the service of the corporation itself.
Thank you very much, EJ.
Thank you. Great talking to you.